self Overcoming self-censorship at uOttawa. My name is Dominique Bourque. I'm a professor at the Institute of Feminist and Gender Studies, as well as at the Department of French. I will be monitoring this session, which will include 2 rounds of presentations. The first round will focus on the events leading to the writing of the book Libertés, malmenées, that could be translated by the academic Freedom Under Attack. It will also include a general description of the book. The second round of presentations will propose 3 analyses by co-authors of the book. The first one will examine the treatment of the events by the central administration. The next one will discuss the teaching of literature in a university. And the last one will address the wider context of the crisis. After these 2 rounds, the speakers will gladly answer questions from the audience. Izak now Serfati is an associate professor at the Department of Communication and the founder of this forum. He co-authored the book Libertés, malmenées with a chapter dedicated to the analysis of the social media crisis. Izak will briefly outline the facts. Izak.
Thank you, Dominique. Yes, I'm gonna kind of do a recap for those who are not that familiar with what happened in October 2020 and all the events that follow after. Just to give you an idea of some of the most important, let's say, dates and facts surrounding this case. First, on September 23rd, 2020, part-time professor Verushka Lieutenant-Duval was teaching her course Art and Gender using Zoom. At that time, we were all in the online teaching mode. And she was explaining how some words were kind of resignified and reappropriated by some groups. For example, she used the word queer to illustrate how this word that was used in a negative way to refer to the gay community was reappropriated by this community in order to take control of the word and resignify the word. And now we have, queer has a completely different connotation. She also used the example of the word, the N word, that was also resignified and used by some members of the Black community in order to use it as a way to, showcase empowerment and social criticism. A student from that course complained to the professor, sending an email, and the professor proposed to the student to have a discussion in class during the next session in order to address her concern about the use of this word. The student decided to send a message on Twitter denouncing Professor Lieutenant-Duval. The Dean of the Faculty of Arts intervened, and he decided to suspend Professor Lieutenant-Duval, and he declared in a memo he sent to the professor of the faculty on October 2nd, that the language used by Professor Lieutenant-Duval was offensive and that it was unacceptable to use that word in the classroom. The journalist Isabelle Haché from the newspaper La Presse published an article on October 15. It's very interesting, the title of the article, "The student is always right. L'étudiant a toujours raison." On October 16, a group of 34 professors from the University of Ottawa from different disciplines write a letter denouncing the suspension of Professor Lieutenant-Duval. The letter is published in the Journal de Montréal, and it's also published, I think that's the next day, in the newspaper Le Droit. On October 18, we could read on Twitter a message calling these 34 professors, most of them white and francophones, but I'm also, as you can see, I'm not a francophone, but I also I signed that letter. In this message on October 18, someone called these professors fucking frogs, a very despective way of referring to French Canadian speakers. And in that message, that person called for the re-education of these fucking frogs. A group of professors from the Department of Sociology signed a petition in support of their colleagues and students and BIPOC students. If you don't know what BIPOC means, it's Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And they also published a version of this petition in French in the newspaper Le Devoir. They say in that petition that the group of professors, of the 34 professors who signed the letter supporting Verushka Lieutenant-Duval, they have used their power and their white privilege in order to support the structures of systemic racism. On October 19, the president of the university sent an email to all the employees of the University of Ottawa, where he qualifies the incident at the Faculty of Arts as an issue pertaining to the right of dignity, to dignity. And he says, I'm going to translate here from the French, something that could be seen as being completely banal for a member of the majority could be perceived by many members of the minority as deeply offensive. And the president of the university said also, the members of the dominant groups, don't have the legitimacy in order to decide what is a microaggression. I'm going to stop here. I mean, we have a full chronology, a very detailed chronology in the book, but I'm going to stop here now. I hope you have an idea of what happened in this case, at least during the first weeks of October 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Izak. Maxime Prévost is one of the co-editors of the book. He's a full professor at the Department of French. He was its director when the Lieutenant-Duval affair broke out. He has published works on Victor Hugo and Alexandre Dumas, and he is currently co-editing Jules Verne's 3 Canadian novels. Maxime Prévost will now present the letter that was signed by 34 professors. Maxime.
Merci, Dominique. So upon reading and rereading Isabelle Hachet's column on the morning of October 15th, 2020, I immediately thought that a reaction coming from the university's professorate was urgent. So the letter was quickly written by 3 of us, and 34 signatures were gathered on the same day from our networks. If we had, we could have had more signatures if we had went looking further, but we wanted to act quick, okay? Because I had immediately got wind of reactions from Quebec colleagues and heard the petition had already begun circulating inside Quebec. Eventually, 2 would come out of Quebec, one of which was signed by 579 professors. So it was in my mind essential that professors from our university show a form of inner dissent in order to show that not all of us were at the University of Ottawa were of one voice on this issue. So as Izak said, the letter was published on October 16th in the Journal de Montréal, and the day after, the 17th, by Le Droit, which is the Ottawa-Gatineau French newspaper. It was also sent to Le Devoir, which chose not to publish it, and it was sent to La Presse, which would not publish it, but would report on it. So it was a very brief letter, which stated the need to fight racism in all its forms, but wanted to stress that no words could be off base for several reasons, notably because in the teaching of literature, for instance, the very texts which contained these words were coming under attack, and this has a chilling effect upon the teaching of anything stemming from the past. For instance, 2 major incidents, one at Concordia University and one at the CBC, dealt with Pierre Vallière's Nègre Blanc d'Amérique. Okay.
One minute. May I ask everyone to turn off their mics, please? May I ask everyone?
Okay, so
bonjour Dominique, si vous êtes le host, vous avez la possibilité vous-même de muter les participants. Fait que vous cliquez sur le participant, sur le petit carré bleu en haut, les 3 points, et vous devriez avoir la possibilité de muter les personnes. Merci.
So, okay, anyways, I'm finished with that 2-minute presentation. Also, obviously, we wanted to show support to Verushka Lieutenant-Duval, who, in our opinion, was unjustly accused of something, of a racist act, which wasn't racist. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxime. We will now turn to Geneviève Tellier, who also co-edited the book. She's a professor of public administration at the School of Political Studies. Her research focuses on public budgeting, public finances, and parliamentarism. She is a former president of the Quebec Political Science Association and is currently the Politics and Public Policy Series editor at the University of Ottawa Press. Geneviève Tellier will offer a brief description of the book, Libertés, malmenées.
Merci beaucoup, Dominique. Hi to everyone. So I will talk about what we have done to come up with that book that we will talk about today. You all have published, I guess, and so you will understand how pleased we were. We started the project in April last year, and in February it was out in the bookstore. So in about 10 months, we were able to gather all the texts, revise them, go to production, editing, and all that kind of stuff, and then publish it. So it's in a very, very short period of time, and we're very pleased. The book is a collection of personal essays. We are not very used to write essays. We're mostly used to write a research paper. So that was kind of an interesting challenge for many of us. All the contributors in the book, there are 14 contributors in the book, all are from the 34 that have signed the letter. We've done that on purpose. It's not impossible that some other publication will be out there eventually that will bring other, not necessarily just the 34, those who have signed the letter. But this, for that book, we wanted to have only contributor coming from the letter. The essay are regrouped in 3 sections. And so we have one section that is about testimonies, what we have lived personally, what was our experience at the University of Ottawa. The second section is about analysis to understand what has occurred, how could we explain what we have witnesses firsthand. And the third section is about propositions. So what could we do for the future? What ideas or proposition recommendation that we have. There is an introduction, quite lengthy introduction. So if you don't want to read the full book, you could go only to the introduction and you will have the essential of the crisis. What happened, Izak and Maxime have done a brief summary, but we provide more facts on that and some general ideas that came out from that from us. Also, there are 2 important chapters in this book. First of all, there is a direct testimony from Verushka Lieutenant-Duval. And so she is with us today, so maybe she will want to talk a bit about that later on. But we have an interview. So the interview was conducted with Martin Meunier, and Verushka, for the first time, was able to tell her whole story. Even the university doesn't know all the facts. And so now we have a detailed account of what she have experienced or with that serious crisis. We have another and very interesting chapter completely at the end is the chronology of event and how that was presented in the media. We have surveyed more than 500 pieces in the media in the country and abroad. It was also highly mediated in some European countries, especially France, the UK and Germany. And so we have that chronology also in the book. The purpose of the book was for us to provide data, to provide facts, to provide an account, a first-hand account from us that witnesses the crisis from the inner, from within the university. And we are sure that this book will provide sufficient material that will be used by future researchers that will want to understand what really occurred at the University of Ottawa. We are sure that this event will be studied a lot. It does have some implication for the University of Ottawa. It does have some implication for the Francophonie also in the province of Ontario, but also in Canada. And it does have some implication for the profession of university professor. And so that was our main purpose, to provide data of that important event that took place almost a year ago. So I will finish here.
Thank you, Geneviève. We will now start the second round of presentation with Pierre Anctil, who is a professor of contemporary Canadian history and Canadian Jewish history at the university. He has written extensively on the history of the Montreal Jewish community and on current debates regarding cultural pluralism in Montreal. Among his contributions are translations from Yiddish to French of memoirs written by Canadian Jewish immigrants in the first part of the 20th century. His last book is a study entitled Anti-judaïsme et influence nazie au Québec, le cas du journal L'Action catholique 1931-1939. Pierre Anctil will now analyze the reaction of the central administration to the situation. He has 15 minutes. À toi, Pierre.
Yeah, Pierre, on t'entend pas. We cannot hear you.
Je me suis jamais habitué. Merci beaucoup, Dominique. Tu me fais signe au bout de 2 minutes. Dear friends, we're going to look at how the university projected or described the crisis, looking at 6 texts, which the university published on the issue starting in October 2020, and which we later discovered were written personally by the rector. The crisis began, at least from the point of view of the university, on the basis of equity, anti-racism, and developed quite outside of this into an issue, a debate about freedom of expression and academic freedom, which is certainly one of the mistakes which the rector made. He wanted to point to the issue of systematic racism, and the debate in the newspapers and the 500 newspaper articles that we mentioned are almost all on a freedom of expression, and the general public was reached with that issue. It had enormous repercussions. It lasted for several weeks and was discussed even by the Prime Minister of Quebec, by many ministers in Quebec, and it was discussed by all the Quebec rectors in different universities. It has to be understood that University of Ottawa is officially bilingual. So when we address any issue, we can write in French to the administration. We can also express ourselves in French or teach in French. But not all our colleagues are Francophones, and some of our colleagues do not understand French. So that's one of the issues which came up, is some of what we tried to communicate was not understood well. The University of Ottawa is also in a Francophone region where Francophones are a minority, and is next to Quebec, which is a majority Francophone society. Also, one of the problems which we could not have influence over is the fact that of course, the COVID pandemic made it very difficult for colleagues and for people involved to communicate and come to terms personally. The university had almost no previous antecedents, did not discuss racism at all, had no specific policy and no clear understanding, at least when the crisis erupted in October 2020. It was not one of the major preoccupations of the university. So the rector, we think, acted more like an anti-racist activist and then a leader of the university freedom, the university life and research that was being conducted on campus. That was not his main preoccupation. Obviously, it's his own choice, and I won't comment on that anymore. He said as little as possible, and so we can look at, when you read my article, we can decipher quite precisely what he's trying to say. Many things played in this crisis: dysfunctional bilingualism, I would say inadequate adaptation of the university to diversity. Diversity has been growing very quickly at the University of Ottawa in the last 5 years. This was not addressed well. And a certain number of racist events took place on campus, that is true, before this debate, having to do with guards, private guards hired by the university, and how they dealt with young people on campus, generally Black, and how this was very well received, very badly received. So nothing that took place in class. As professors, we're not concerned with what is taking place on the campus outside in the street. We had no data that was reliable on what kind of racism was taking place on campus. What types of racist gestures were being made. There was no documentation even on one case specifically. The university did not analyze what was going on and did not communicate this, nor did we know who was the victim of this racist or environment. I've no doubt that there is a racist environment in our society and that there is systematic racism, but in a complex environment like the university, and given that the professors have certain responsibilities, the university should have been more specific before in addressing this more precisely. What the rector did, I think, is to use the event in class that we just described as a ways to advance his own notions of how to fight against racism, which we do not oppose. We think that's his own choice, but he did it in a way which was, in our own point of view, unreasonable and which affected our freedom of expression and our ability to teach in class in a professional and reasonable way. After October 2nd, 2020, the rector and the dean of Faculty of Arts said clearly that certain words and certain expressions could not be used in class under any circumstance, under any pretext. Only one case of clear racism was brought forward to show this, and it was what we just described. So it was, in our opinion, censorship without proof of any reason to advance it, any reason to clearly expose the damage done and why there should be constraints in our own activities. In other words, there is a price to pay, and the professors felt that the price was too high, that to be forced to constrain ourselves and restrain ourselves in our teaching is not the way to resolve this issue. You've heard Izak cite two passages in the first message of the rector that we cannot, certainly as professors or as members of the dominant group, and not all professors are members of that dominant group, we cannot determine what is a microaggression, and we're unable to come to terms with this when it happens. And it should not be analyzed, it should not be studied or examined, it should just be repressed. And that was clearly anti-rational in our mind and anti-academic. I do not see how we could not ourselves use our faculties and abilities and training and goodwill to come to terms with this issue. So that was also unacceptable in our own mind. The capacity of the professors to exercise their competence, their abilities, the experience they have in pedagogy, and to address such problems in class should they rise, and to prevent the feeling of oppression by discussing, by preventing the students that were coming in area which is difficult to discuss. That seemed to be unacceptable and could not be envisaged by the rector. And so arbitrarily, he decided to repress any form of thinking or deeper reflection on this debate. So for him, and the term is to be used carefully, dignity prevailed over academic freedom. In other words, if a person would come forward and say that is unacceptable, we cannot discuss it. We cannot examine it. We cannot think about it. And this decision to impose sanctions was clearly stated without justification or limits. And sanctions, the rector used the word sanctions against us if we committed racist acts, or if we even decided to examine the issue. Because in his mind, something we find unacceptable, racism was rife in class. We still have to receive proof of this. And if so, we're ready to examine it. I am, at least, and I would like to see descriptions, case studies, and certainly willing to go further on this. So the rector neglected the collective agreements signed between the professors and the university to impose us censorship, and he neglected the issue of fundamental rights, that we're still citizens able to express ourselves reasonably in a context of, I would say, consensual debate. That was no longer possible as far as certain issues and certain words were concerned. 2 more minutes. Basically, the issue became even more pronounced and complex and difficult when one of the professors from the University of Ottawa, Professor Atahan, a few weeks later uttered insults against the Francophones in a different context, and that made the position of the rector untenable, because the least semblance of racism in class, which basically was not proven, was all right for another person using the media, the social medias, to insult Francophones freely and openly. And that brought, I would say, a point of rupture into the debate, that yes, everyone should be the object of dignity. Yes, everyone should be able to examine what is racism and how to counteract it. And yes, everyone should be able to touch on certain words and certain situations, but certain professors did not have to, and a certain professor could insult the Francophones. That brought an enormous outcry in the French media, and that basically put an end to what the rector felt was the use of censorship, because he could not obviously impose it on hostility towards Francophones, which is about 30% of the student body. Shortly after, the rector asked former Supreme Court Justice Michel Bastarache to present an analysis from the point of view of the supreme law, as to what should be done. And Bastarache clearly said that it's not possible to exercise censorship in class and prevent the use of certain words within the context of reasonable discussion, respectable arguments, and using measures to alleviate the sense of perhaps hostility and indignity that certain students may have felt. And since the university has backed off, has not reissued threats of sanctions against us or threats of arbitrary measures. Thank you. Merci beaucoup à tout le monde.
Merci beaucoup, Pierre. We will now hear Maxime Prévost again on the teaching of literature this time, and he has 13 minutes. Maxime.
Merci, Dominique. So I'm going to present some conclusions that we reached in our chapter. So the chapter I co-wrote in the book with my friend and colleague Geneviève Boucher from the French department studies the crisis from the standpoint of the teaching of literature. So we're both literature professors. She is a specialist of 18th century literature and myself 19th century literature. So And she was very hard hit by the backlash that followed the letter, so much so that she had to go into a sick leave, which she discusses in our dialogue. So one conclusion that we wish to put forward is that literary studies, if they are to survive, must remain free from the tyranny of presentism, what could be called presentism, that is the makeshift and spontaneous accusations of the past. It must be understood that in these accusations, in literary studies at least, these accusations will not necessarily be pointed at the professor, but at the very works that are studied, sometimes for the mere presence of words that do not hold the same value across time, as though no such field of study as philology even existed. Most of the works we study will, I believe, constitute a form of microaggression for someone in the classroom. For instance, in the current wartime context opposing Russia and Ukraine, some might take offense at having to read Tolstoy's War and Peace. For instance, one would be very hard-pressed to find any 19th century novel dealing with North American First Nations in French or English, which doesn't use the word Indian. Our colleagues at McGill University's French department simultaneously encountered major turmoil because the so-called N-word was present in 1863's Forestier and Voyageur by Joseph Charles Taché, and in Anne Hébert's Les Fous de Bassan. I believe they both are here this evening, Arnaud Bernardet and Isabelle Arsenault. They might have a few words to say on this. So I wish to put forward that it's essential to keep in mind that there is a major, I would say, an ontological difference between a word in mention and a word in use. And I believe that this statement should not be controversial. The fact that it has become so should be cause for concern. Intention does matter, and so does context. I believe that the idea that it is unsafe for students to be destabilized by opposing or paradoxical viewpoints is, in my view at least, dangerous. Again, this is particularly true in literary studies, literature often being the expression of paradoxical, even willfully strange ideas and conceptions. Teaching the Marquis de Sade, for instance, today at the University of Ottawa would be tantamount to professional suicide, and I guess one can live with that. But the reality of the matter is that no literary work is absolutely controversy-proof, and that without institutional commitment to academic freedom, professors are from now on walking on eggs. And the situation is, of course, much worse for part-time faculty. So, from different sentences that we put together in our dialogue, Geneviève and I came together with a generic trigger warning that I now use in all my course syllabus, and she does the same, which I'm going to read in French, and I'm going to give the translation immediately after. Okay, so here it goes. Il est essentiel de garder à l'esprit que nous étudions des œuvres du passé et que le passé est parfois déconcertant par sa radicale étrangeté. Les présupposés de plusieurs œuvres à l'étude ne sont plus les nôtres. Les mots qui les constituent peuvent parfois nous sembler déplacés. Les valeurs qu'elles véhiculent peuvent nous sembler contestables. Il faut aussi garder à l'esprit que les grands textes littéraires sont de hauts lieux de dissensus. Ils le sont au sein de leur propre époque, puis ce dissensus s'élargit à mesure que se creuse le fossé historique, which, translated in English, would go, It is essential to remember that we will study works stemming from the past, and that the past is often disconcerting by its radical alterity. The presuppositions of some of these works are no longer ours. The words they use might strike us as uncalled for. Their very values may seem questionable. We must also keep in mind that great literary works are forums of dissension. They are so in their own time, and this dissensus increases with the passage of decades and centuries. And I refuse to put anything more specific than that as a trigger warning. And indeed, this is something that we could discuss, but I'm very concerned that trigger warnings have the opposite effect of what they are supposed to achieve. At least several studies have seemed to indicate as much. So I'm going to conclude for now because I want to have room for discussion, and I'm going to conclude by quoting Jay Bhattacharya from the Stanford School of Medicine, who tweeted last week something that goes as such that I thought was very inspiring. He says that we must learn to differentiate between negative academic freedom and positive academic freedom. Okay, so negative academic freedom equals not being fired for saying controversial things, while positive academic freedom means creating conditions for respectful debates and discussion between people who disagree on controversial things. He added, many top universities failed at both during the pandemic. What we achieved, I think, with our letter, unwillingly, was an exercise in negative academic freedom, and such that we were not fired, at least not yet. It remains to be seen whether positive academic freedom, that is the creating of conditions for respectful debates and discussion between people who disagree on controversial things, whether that such a positive academic freedom can still be a reality at the University of Ottawa. Merci, c'est ça pour l'instant.
Merci beaucoup, Maxime. Alors, let us now listen to Geneviève Tellier on the wider context of the crisis.
Thank you very much, Dominique. And yes, as Maxime has said, we were not fired. I would add as for now. So we'll see we'll see how it unfolds. My own presentation, I want to summarize my own chapter written in the moment. So those are a few ideas that I have thrown on paper. My thinking may evolve in the coming months, years. I don't know. We'll see about that. The title is as follow: How an EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion, so a EDI industry, maybe I should say business, has created a woke academic governance. And I'm fully aware that woke is a charged word and it could be debated a lot, but I will stick with that title and I maintain my position like that. And so I am arguing in that chapter that a new form of governance has appeared in Canadian university. This is highly visible at the University of Ottawa, yet it is also currently being implemented in other Canadian universities. It is a phenomenon that comes from the US. And I want to stress one message is that it's not just in the US that will occur elsewhere on the planet. In Canada, we're a close neighbor, but not just in Canada. My sense is that we will see that in other countries. What is a woke governance? It means, briefly, it means that race, and more specifically, the color of your skin now matters. More generally, it builds on the tenet of the critical race theory, and it's used the language of the critical race theory. I just want to give you an example, but go back to the chapter of Pierre and you will have plenty of examples about that. But we have a declaration from our president at the university that goes as follows: members of dominant group simply have no legitimacy to decide what constitutes a microaggression. And so you have language and words like microaggression, unconscious bias, power of the dominant group, safe space, and etc. That is now part of the regular vocabulary used by the university authority. There are other manifestations of award governance. For example, the University of Ottawa now has a special advisor on anti-racism and inclusion. Special support is offered to Black students, especially for mental health. At least that was the case when I last visited the website. I don't know if it's still there. Mandatory training on anti-racism and unconscious bias is now the norm. It is not mandatory for all employees, but if you want to take some special task, you need to follow those training. And now hiring of professor is also guided by the critical race theory. I just want to show you one posting that is currently going on. And so there is a position offered at the Institute of Feminist and Gender Study with the School of International Development and Global Study that is seeking, and I quote, one regular tenure track faculty position in decolonial feminism, anti-racism, and international development, preferential hiring of racial and indigenous candidates. And so if you are not racialized or indigenous, don't postulate on that. And as such, only qualified application for racialized or indigenous people will be considered and evaluated for that position. So that's a major shift from positive hiring that we used to know, where at the time we were saying, well, at equal competency, preferences will be given to people from different minority groups. And so you really see that new phenomenon going on campuses. How did we came to that situation? I will cite three major reasons I think that are important. They come from students, they come from professors, and they come from administrators. And so students, we have witnesses a huge wave of clientelism across campuses in Canada, where the financial aspect is important. And so first of all, students are paying much higher tuition fees than they used to do. In about 20, 30 years, the past years, the tuition fees have more than doubled in Canada. In some provinces, it has even tripled. And so now students are no more students, but they are clients, and clients that are paying a lot of money to get an education and that have a lot of needs. University will try to appeal to students on several fronts. One thing that is very appealing to students is the quest for social justice. And so you remember when you yourself, you were young, the issue of justice, social justice, helping those that are more fragile and marginalized. That's something of interest and something of concern for many students. And so manifesting that kind of support is one way of attracting students to universities. Individual services also is important. We want to show to students that we care for each and individual students, that they have this safe space. We want to appeal also to their own parents. We want to create a student experience, and that the word experience comes often. And what happens is that universities are in competition among themselves. So they try to attract as much students as possible, and they try to keep those students within on campus. And so, as I said before, students are now clients. And if you listen to the official discourse of the administrator, they will refer to students as clients. So that's kind of concerning. A second reason comes from colleagues, comes from a professor themselves that engage in that kind of way of seeing the world. And so everything is built on race, especially colleagues that are in comparative studies. And so colleagues that used to study those who are a minority, that are marginalized, and try to understand those that are victim of our system. And what has happened in recent years, those colleagues have passed from being allies of the most fragile in society to being the oppressor themselves because of the color of their own skin. And so because they are white, they are part of the dominant group. And so if you want, you as a researcher, as a professor, to continue study or continue being active in your own field of study, the only way you could help those that you have studied and those for whom you care, because you have been studying them for years and you understand their difficulties. The only thing for you is to step out and let others speak instead of you and only show support. And so you will have a commitment, a large declaration of support that are addressed to those community. And you yourself as a researcher, you'll try to do your best, but knowing that now you are the bad white oppressor. That is the problem of at the source of all problem. And finally, the third group are the administrator themselves. They are mostly in search of legitimacy, because now most administrators do not come from the campus or the university, the institution, but are sought from outside. And so they come either from another university, but more and more from another organization, whether public or private, and they come here and then they lack their legitimacy. They have to show that they want the good of the institution, and they need to build support very quickly. Time is money also. And so one way of building that legitimacy is to support a noble cause. Again, social justice is a very noble cause, and so they will try to be at the front as the front runner of that cause, and try to build support around their own activity. Some of our administrators have even become moral entrepreneurs, and so they want to build themselves the cause and show the path to go to that. If you look at the University of Ottawa, most of the administrators come from outside, and most have embraced this critical race theory way of seeing things. Apart from the three causes that I have briefly laid out, there are other questions, I think, that arise from that. I just want to mention that briefly. We could come back on that later on in this discussion. First, the EDI is a very lucrative business now. It is a business of multiple billions of dollars in US and Canada and elsewhere. A business that contains many self-proclaimed consultants, being from a rationalized group, allow you to become a consultant. Self-proclaimed programs also. So we see there is the lucrative activity. We see the business opportunity. Also a new field of accreditation. So you could become yourself a consultant and be accredited by organization that we don't really know what they are. It's truly a cost-benefit exercise. Yes, it is costly to engage in a EDI transformation, but at the same time, the benefit is there. It's a very highly visible. You manifest, you make a declaration, you set up an office, you appoint 1 or 2 persons, and so you show a commitment. So, as I said, very lucrative business. Another question. The problem is that EDI doesn't deliver, and so we are still waiting for the result. That's an element of concern. We lack evidence based on hard data. I think Pierre has mentioned that also, and we see it generally. The training, some research started to be conducted on training on unconscious bias and on anti-racism behavior. And in fact, it seems that the training creates more racism. And so that is also does not help to solve the problem. So more racism, more polarization, more stigmatization. And so not everything is going as expected. So yes, we need research on that. And finally, I have a section where I say, well, we have a problem, we have a solution in search of a problem. And so what exactly is the problem? We don't know exactly what is the problem. An example, a survey recently showed that 21% of faculty in a Canadian university belongs to a visible minority group, 21% of professors. While the population in Canada, it's 22%. So we're not very far off. And so could we know what exactly is the problem? That's one major criticism that I would formulate against that. And finally, my conclusion, should we be optimistic or pessimistic? Both. I'm both at the same time. I'm pessimistic because the popularity of that movement is still out there, and more we see new manifestation of embracing that movement that is not solidly implemented and that has delivered until now. But at the same I'm also optimistic because we researchers are doing research that's our tool that is at our disposal. And I think that eventually with research, we will be able to better understand exactly what's the best mechanism to fight racism. Pierre has said it before, it does exist, but I think that we're taking the wrong path to really take the concern and address it directly. And I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Geneviève. We will now turn our attention to the audience. To allow the hearing of as many questions as possible, I'm asking those who will take this opportunity to ask a question to be concise. We have 30 minutes to discuss, so this is nice. And I will ask you to raise your hands. So I won't read out what was written in the chat because I'd like you to voice your question. So please raise your hand. Yes, André, Mariquette. You have to unmute yourself.
Bonjour, vous m'entendez bien?
Yes, oui. Les questions peuvent être posées en français ou en anglais.
Is it okay in French? Is it okay in French? No? Okay.
Yes.
No.
Oui.
Je vais être plus à l'aise comme ça. Bon, écoutez, moi, j'ai une expérience assez longue à l'Université du Québec à Montréal. J'ai travaillé aux affaires publiques pour l'université pendant 28 ans. Alors, voilà, moi, je constate que dans beaucoup d'universités, on est aux prises avec un espèce de bouillon de wokisme et que ça handicape un peu la vie intellectuelle de nos universités qui ont eu des problèmes dans le passé avec le marxisme et maintenant c'est avec le wokisme. Bon, moi, je me demande comment clarifier ce bouillon-là ou l'assécher un peu. Hein, et il n'y a pas de réponse simple ou de réponse unique à une question comme celle-là. Je voulais simplement dire que j'ai eu beaucoup de conversations avec des étudiants, des professeurs et des recteurs aussi avec les années et que voici ce qui, selon moi, est une façon de contribuer à régler le problème du wokisme, c'est de faire intervenir davantage la démocratie étudiante dans les universités. Alors, comment y arriver? Simplement, et ça, c'est les recteurs qui me le disaient, il faudrait que le gouvernement du Québec impose, à l'intérieur de la loi 32 là, sur les associations étudiantes, qu'il impose la nécessité pour une association qui veut avoir des cotisations étudiantes, c'est souvent des centaines de milliers de dollars, donc que ces directions d'associations étudiantes soient élues au scrutin secret et par Internet. Nous, à l'UQAM, ça voudrait dire que 50% des étudiants qui sont là, qui sont à temps partiel, qui n'ont absolument pas le temps de venir à des réunions d'associations, ils pourraient venir, ils pourraient participer au choix de leurs représentants. Alors, voilà. Moi, c'est une idée que je lance comme ça et je pense que enfin, s'il y a des réactions, ça m'intéresse, mais c'est comme une idée que je lance.
Merci. Voilà. Merci. On va donner la parole maintenant à Joël Beddoes.
I'll just translate what André said. André was talking about, possible solutions to what we're actually going through right now. And he was talking about past issues with extreme Marxism, for example. And one of the possible solutions that he was mentioning was the idea that student democracy and different methods of student democracy, including voting through secret ballots, might be part of the solution. to make the process more dynamic, but also perhaps to have student representation that is in tune with actual student opinion. André, did I synthesize that properly? Okay, good. I'm going to cede my droit de parole, and if anybody else, si quelqu'un d'autre vous pose sa question en français, je peux faire une synthèse en anglais par la suite. So, who's next?
Merci beaucoup, Joël. Merci. David Spinello.
So first of all, thanks to all contributors. And I mean, I am in engineering, so I express my solidarity to all the ones that had to teach topics that are controversial. I don't have this problem, but yeah, anyway, I wanted to ask a question. I have many questions, but this one to the contributors, basically. Do you have anything, is there anything in the book about our union? Because this is something really concerns me. Because basically, when before Geneviève mentioned the industry of equity, diversity, and inclusion, often though, the pain that we had to suffer through the Orwellian training and education is inflicted by our union rather than the central administration. For example, the mandatory training for people in hiring committees was imposed by our union through one of the collective agreements. I remember fighting about this and screaming that it was not wise, that instead of waiting for the administration to impose things on us and the union fighting against it, is actually self-inflicted. In fact, even the implicit association test by admission of the same authors, one from Harvard, one from Washington State, is not something that should be ever used to make any policy decision, because it's not a reliable nor reproducible test. And still, we are using it as if it is, given. So anyway, sorry for going a little bit off rails probably, but what I was wondering if there is anything about our union, because I think from an historical point of view, from the sake of documentation and keeping historical memory of what happened, it should be mentioned the role of the union and how it has actually worked against us collectively as professors. And I find it completely pathetic when we get to the point that a university has to start a public basic consultation about academic freedom, as if we should even be discussing whether or not academic freedom should be a feature or some defining feature of a university. I mean, I found it completely pathetic, a complete defeat of what we are anyway. But I mean, it's unfortunate that's where we are. So thanks again.
Thank you, Davide. Thank you very much. We will hear the next person that raised their hand, and then we'll give again the possibility to the co-authors to respond to your question. Very good. Raoul Collin?
Oui, je vais le commenter en français. J'ai partagé dans le clavardage en anglais et en français une synthèse de ma réaction à cette discussion. Pour le synthétiser davantage, je dirais que je regarde ces phénomènes dans le cadre des politiques identitaires extrêmes qui sont en train de proliférer en Occident. Et je pense que les politiques identitaires qui ne cherchent pas le partage, mais qui cherchent l'exclusivisme, ça finit tôt ou tard en génocide. C'est tout. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce que Joël, vous voulez traduire brièvement la pensée de Monsieur Collin?
There's an extended comment both in French and English, but basically he's talking about extreme identity politics or identitism. I don't know if that's a word in English, but I know it is in French, and its eventual consequences, which leads to ghettoization, quite obviously, and can go as far as leading to genocide.
Merci. Thank you, Joël. We will now allow the authors to respond to some of the comments that were raised. Perhaps one of you would like to start. I saw Geneviève that was, yes. Go ahead, Geneviève.
And now we're going into improvised speech. If you'd like to do it in French, I can translate, but I may stop you to do a summary.
All right. My English is fine and you did understand what I said before, I'll continue. Yes, I mentioned a few thoughts from André Valquette. I mean, this is clientelism, what the director, what the president of university are asking. So on the one hand, they don't want the government to impose academic liberté, freedom. On the other hand, they want to constrain students and have a law to say what students should do. I mean, it doesn't work like that. I mean, I'm kind of appalled to hear that suggestion. Now, that being said, it is true that what we hear from the student association is probably not representing well the sense of the majority of students. My feeling is that most students don't pay attention to that issue and they don't care, they don't mind. Another good portion are concerned about what they are doing, and those are especially students that want to speak and feel that they don't have the opportunity to speak. So the problem of academic freedom is not just for us professors, but it is also for our own students. There was a report that was presented, Bastarache report, a few months ago, that contained an appendix with a summary of the testimony of the memoir that were submitted to the committee, and that appendix was recalled, so they decided not to have it published. And what is concerning for me is that about half of those who participated in the exercise were students. So that's another way of limiting the freedom of speech of students on our campus. David, the union representative is with us today, so maybe she has something to say, or the past union representative is also here. The book, yes, we do talk about the union in the book. We were also concerned, and the work is not strong enough about their position. What you're making reference to after we have written the book, but yes, we saw the change that was made to the union agreement. Again, maybe it's to have more professors speaking, and let's show to the union that we're not satisfied with their decision. But that's one front we have to look at for sure. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Geneviève. I know that other professors that signed that letter are present with us. So if you do want to express yourself and you do want to respond to the comments, please do so. Any other professor wants to pick on what either the first speaker or the second speaker introduced as questions?
Yes, but Maxime would like to react. Please go ahead.
Je voudrais juste rapidement parler de la question syndicale. Okay, so as far as the union goes, they were in a very difficult position because the professorate is split on the question, and the way things played out. I wouldn't have wanted to be in their shoes, really. And I think that the directorate is to blame for that, because constantly throughout the crisis, they have played in every communication by our rector, they have played academic freedom against anti-racism. And they have placed the professorate in the position where they had to choose one or the other, which is extremely silly. And the way out of this crisis was to stop doing that. So I don't have a solution as how to get out of it now, because it's very late. But for other universities, for other people listening, never play academic freedom against anti-racism. And it's never play anti-racism against academic freedom. The two are not irreconcilable if you have some conception of how a university intellectual life should be run.
Okay, if there's no other professors, what I'll do is I'll hand in I'll give you, Don Tilson, the possibility to ask your question, and then we can come back with the union representatives if they want to take this opportunity to express themselves. Yes, please, go ahead.
It's Dominique, thank you. And special thanks and hello to Izak, my good friend, for inviting me here from Miami.
Hello, Don.
The other,
Good to see you.
the other end of the hemisphere, a country where we have no disagreements whatsoever. We just, send mobs to attack Congress and destroy as much as we can, which I'm really ashamed of. We're dealing with many of the same issues. And we've been dealing with many of these issues for a long time. You teach a freedom of expression course and you come across the same issues that were debated 50, 60 years ago. Ivory towers, universities are no longer ivory towers. The world has come into campus as much as we feel that we can, push it away or keep it away or wish it away. I tell my students, it says we're a civil society, or are we more of an uncivil society, where we've lost respect for the other, whoever the other seems to be. We're dealing with 3 pandemics. There's a biological pandemic, there's a social pandemic, and there's a political pandemic. And as we know, the biological one is not through yet. We're going through variants of that. And I dare suggest that the other 2 are very hotly moving along with their own variants of sorts. Who polices the thought police? Where the thought police happen to be in the regime that controls the institution. And it's one regime today, it's another regime tomorrow. I recently retired from the University of Miami, but I'm still in touch with my colleagues there. And to give you a sense of what we're doing, the administration has not requested, not suggested, but commanded each college and each program area to appoint a director of diversity and inclusion. And of course, as you can imagine, they're selecting those directors as people who are compatible with their own thoughts and beliefs. And I asked one of them in the School of Communication, where I was teaching for about 30 years, public relations. I said, well, what does this mean? He said, well, we're waiting for the guidelines to be given to us by the administration. I said, no discussion? No. No suggestions for how you should formulate those guidelines? No. We will be given our marching orders and we will march. When you deal with situations like that, and I've known professors, I'm sure you've known professors too, who feel that they can use the classroom as a bully pulpit for whatever prejudices they have, and they beat the students on the head with their point of view the entire semester. I mean, in days past, whether it's anti-Semitism, misogynistic professors, I had one for romantic literature, and God forbid, he hated women. And he made it very clear to us that he did, and we had to put up with that for the entire semester. And when you have full professors who have tenured professors, it takes an act of Congress to be able to get rid of them, and you still can't. Where do we go from here? And I guess that's the question we're all debating and wrestling with. I think those of us, we are reasonable persons. We like to conduct our class reasonably. I was up on a Fulbright grant, thanks to Izak, and we taught a course put together on public relations and diversity. And you could have gotten into all kinds of problems with that, but the way we approached it was as reasonable people. We did not use our own particular thoughts to command the class. And I think we have to try to begin with that so that we don't create more problems than we already have. But observations from Miami, which is probably as culturally diverse as you're going to get, and where do you find common ground? I think it's becoming increasingly difficult in our society and in every society. Anyway, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I would like to hear, Heather Morrison, please.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just wondering, how do we start a broader conversation about this, because to me, it's just, it just doesn't make sense. Like the whole, as Maxime was talking, the whole idea of mixing up the signifier with the actual intention. I do some teaching on intellectual freedom, which is important for librarianship. And the word in question is in use by people who are currently writing who are from that particular group. How do you explain to people that, if I go and walk to the theater, these are the conversations I want to be having. If I go walk to the theater and I see that someone has sprayed a swastika on the Jewish Orthodox Church, that's not the same thing as going to the theater and watching a Second World War movie where you see those symbols all the time. And what we're talking about is not being allowed to show those things in our classroom. And I also put in the chat, how many of our students are sensitive students who need their safe spaces, or not watching any TV or movies that have the warnings about language, sex, etc. And that's what the commercial sector is producing, because that is what people watch. So this is I'm glad we're having this discussion, and I'm glad for all the people who are here, but how do we make that broader, get the broader university community and the upper administration to have these conversations and to realize that it's kind of silly. And I also teach social media. How do we prepare people for a world where there's a lot of those kinds of words and much worse going on?
Thank you, Professor Morrison. Thank you. I see that Pierre Anctil is probably wanting to respond to some of your concerns.
Yes, I use excerpts or screenings of the Eichmann trial of 1961. I teach, and I certainly don't mean to say that I approve what he did or what he says. But it's essential in the 20th century to know that genocides took place, and to understand how and along what logic. And it extends a very broad range of events. I would say we need a broader conversation. We work in universities, so we need science and knowledge. We need statistics. We need the rational data, definitions, contextualization. We're good at that, but we don't use it for this purpose. The rector has not used any. He simply claimed, out of his own volition, that this phenomena existed. I don't doubt it exists, but I'd like to know more. I'd like to fight it with some evidence and some approach that is rational, and find a way to organize myself and my colleagues and the students around a number of consensus issues. And especially in class, I would like to discuss it with whoever shows up and is a student, a bona fide student, and understand how we operate and why a debate from several angles is important. But we shy away from this. Our university has been simply uttering mantras, without any background, or we need to address this with more of our skills, and our skills are in research and science and ability to analyze and remain at a certain distance. If we would use a bit more of this, I think we'd achieve much better and much more convincing results than being, se faire taper sur la tête avec des affirmations idéologiques. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Pierre. Before I ask David his question, I would like to invite students. if they feel like, you know, expressing some concerns, have some comments, please do so. This is the forum to do so. So yes, Davide Spinello.
Following Pierre's comment, I would like to say sometimes it would be nice to have some clarity from the university, because going on in our campus and saying that we have to be anti-racist is completely uncontroversial. It's like saying we need to stop at the red sign. I mean, it's completely uncontroversial, but I would like to know what does the president mean when he say anti-racist? Because, for example, concerning me, Robin DiAngelo and Ibrahim Kendi, no, I'm not anti-racist in that sense. I am anti-racist in the narrow sense of the word because I am revolted by racism, but I'm not. I think the approach of Ibrahim Kendi is completely ridiculous. So we have to, I mean, we cannot throw words like this and use them as political wedges without clarifying what you're saying. So following what Pierre says, when the administration comes down on us with those statements, they should clarify what they mean. It would be beneficial for everyone so that we know how to eventually reply to these things as well.
Thank you, Professor Spinello. We will now hear Farina's Basmeshi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the great session. Thank you, speakers. I don't know if my question after you have discussed would sound kind of absurd, but
Farina, would you like to introduce yourself just so that people might know that you are a doctoral student? So just
sure, thank you. I'm a first year PhD student in the Feminist and Gender Studies Institute, and I'm a student of Dr. Bourque. It's my pleasure. My question is based on what you've discussed this session and based on the academic and political climate. Are you aware of any sort of governmental or funding coming from government or university to push studies regarding this issue specifically to help students or faculty to conduct studies in this area?
Thank you, Farina. So this is a very interesting question. What are the funds available for students who do want to, write thesis on this subject? So if ever a professor is interested in directing some students, please, tell them, make it clear. Anyone wants to comment on this? Okay, so we'll hear Professor Morrison.
Hi, I'm not sure. Was there a question for me?
No, your hand was up.
Oh, sorry. No, I forgot to put it down. Okay, sorry.
Good. Okay, so any other students that would like to take this opportunity to perhaps comment on the situation, on what happened at the University of Ottawa? This is, perhaps a good opportunity to do so. Yes, Samuel, please go ahead. Tell us who you are. Your mic is closed.
Évidemment. Alors, bonjour, je m'appelle Samuel, j'ai fait mon bac à l'Université d'Ottawa en lettres françaises en rédaction et j'ai fait une maîtrise sous la supervision de Dominique Bourque à l'Institut d'études féministes et de genre. Je trouve la conversation d'aujourd'hui très intéressante parce que j'ai été confronté à une situation semblable lorsque j'étais assistant d'enseignement pour la session d'hiver de janvier à avril 2018. Un des livres à l'étude était « Comment faire l'amour avec un nègre sans se fatiguer ». Et ça avait créé plusieurs malaises en salle de classe. Et c'était aussi par moments un malaise pour moi. Je ne savais pas toujours quel terme utiliser.
Samuel, on va demander à Joël peut-être de résumer vos propos, et ensuite vous pourrez continuer simplement pour que les anglophones puissent suivre. So we'll ask Joël if he's okay with this to give us an update of what was just said.
Yep. So Samuel completed his undergraduate studies in French and completed a master's in gender studies supervised by Dr. Bourque. And he faced a situation, I believe he said last semester, where he was working as a teaching assistant and he had to teach Denis Laferrière's novel, How to Make Love to a Negro Without Hurting Yourself. I'm not sure that's the consecrated translation, but it gives you an idea. And I will add an editorial note. We're in the thick of it here because nègre does not translate to the N-word in English. It is actually Negro. So that's my linguistic editorial note. Samuel, continue, je vais traduire après.
Oui, donc c'est ça, ça me posait certaines difficultés par moment de me demander quel mot utiliser, dans quel contexte. Et la professeure pour qui je travaillais a cessé d'enseigner ce livre-là parce qu'elle recevait trop de commentaires. Elle se faisait dire qu'elle était raciste alors qu'elle est mariée à une personne noire. Et c'est ça, il y avait une espèce de malaise, puis je ne savais pas où je pouvais trouver les outils pour me débrouiller là-dedans.
Thank you so much, Samuel. We'll let Joël conclude, and thank you for this testimony.
So Samuel and both the professor he was working for had a malaise because of comments made by the students. And in fact, the professor who was in charge of teaching this class has stopped teaching this novel. This person was called racist, and Samuel was finding this, as the professor might have, odd since the spouse of this individual was Black. So Samuel is looking for tools, solutions, best practices. I'm going to assume something, Samuel, that you're not to have to not stop teaching things. Is that what you're, pour ne pas être obligé d'arrêter d'enseigner certains textes?
Ben, en fait, ouais, j'ai mis terme à mes astanas d'enseignement et c'est une des raisons. Parce que je ne me sentais pas outillé suffisamment face à certaines situations comme celle-là, malheureusement.
Right. So Samuel has in fact stopped being a teaching assistant because he did not feel tooled or have the available best practices explained to him in order to best manage these kinds of questions and situations.
Merci. Thank you, Samuel and Joël. Yes, Geneviève, please.
Okay, I wanted to react to Samuel's comment, but I think that we all have something to say about what he has just said. The problem, Samuel, is that we need clear guidance from the top, and we don't have this clear guidance, and we are asking for that clear guidance, but we don't listen to us or to the majority of professors that want those guidance. This is really the case of censorship, as we know, occurs frequently on campus, and administrators do not believe us on that. And so they are saying, well, no, censorship doesn't exist. Professors are free to talk and select readings, whatever they want. But the fact is, when you have that kind of situation, I mean, you will think twice before going back and repeating the same bad experience. And so that's what's occurring right now. So when we talk about documenting what's happening now on campuses, that's the kind of thing we should document. I'm not sure it's easy to document because people don't want necessarily to talk, and everybody lives its own experience. But this is exactly the problem. And so you, as a student who should not have that burden on your shoulder, you were the one faced with that situation, and nobody was able to help you because there's no guidelines. And that's, for me, is what is appalling, and something should be done about that. So we hear before a question, what do? We have to document, gathering data, that's one thing important. But at the same time, we need the number to tell the administrator, enough is enough, and we want to do our job, and the current situation doesn't allow us to do that. But people need to speak, and people do not speak, and people will probably not speak because they saw us, the 34, what happened to us, and so they will be cautious about that. But the thing is that the administrator did not protect us. And so we are in that situation that I don't think, I say at the end of my presentation, I'm pessimistic and optimistic. So I don't know where we're going about on that.
Thank you very much, Geneviève. We could eventually ask students that, why didn't they speak? That's one question we could ask them later on. But unfortunately, we won't have the time because this is the last question we can hear, and that's it.
Pierre avait levé la main, juste.
Yeah, we'll allow Pierre to speak, but unfortunately, we have reached the end of this forum.
Juste un mot pour vous expliquer. Je crois que la haute administration a eu beaucoup de difficultés à comprendre ce que c'est qu'un acte pédagogique. On est dans une classe, on est derrière des portes closes, on est des professionnels de l'enseignement, on a de l'expérience, on comprend ce que c'est que d'amener des questions difficiles. Le malaise, la complexité fait partie de l'acte pédagogique. On n'est pas, vous savez, dans une situation où tout est parfait dans le monde. Il y a des problématiques lourdes, il y a des difficultés graves. On peut en discuter. On peut provoquer une réaction en autant qu'on reste à l'intérieur des limites que peuvent subir les étudiants et on établit ces limites dans un acte pédagogique. Un acte pédagogique, c'est quelque chose de tout à fait exceptionnel. C'est, d'une part, amener des données complexes et de l'autre, permettre aux différentes personnes d'échanger et respectueux. Il y a des personnes qui ne peuvent pas aller plus loin, il faut le dire. Ce n'est pas une affirmation idéologique. Le recteur a beaucoup de difficultés à comprendre que l'enseignement, c'est une discussion. On ne peut pas affirmer violemment et sans discussion et faire comprendre les choses de manière arbitraire, ce qui a voulu nous imposer en réalité. Alors, j'apprécie beaucoup les préoccupations autour de l'acte pédagogique et j'espère que l'université va comprendre ce que c'est qu'un acte pédagogique et comment nous, les professionnels, on assume cette difficulté, cette complexité.
Thank you, Pierre. Joël, would you like to wrap up and explain what Pierre just said?
Absolutely, I'll do so very quickly. So the administration has trouble understanding what teaching actually is. We are professional pedagogues and malaise or discomfort is part of the academic process. It's part of the learning process. We live in an imperfect world, and as pedagogues, we establish limits to what students are allowed to investigate. We do so by bringing facts into the conversation and forcing them to use facts as well. And this is a way to establish boundaries. This is not ideology at work. This is education. Education is not violent or arbitrary. It is, in fact, about thought and transmission. And Pierre wishes that the administrators would better understand what's actually going on in the classrooms by their own professional professors.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Pierre and Joël. I will say the last words. I hope this forum was instructive and enlightening for everyone. It certainly was for me, for myself. I now want to thank Izak for inviting us, the speakers for taking the time to share their perspectives and analysis with us, and the audience for its presence and interest in the questions of academic freedom. Thank you very, very much.
Before we finish, I would like to say something that Verushka wrote in the chat. It's an important nuance because what she says is that after the Bastard report was published, the administration changed a little bit the accusation against her. I mean, the argument in order to justify what they did. And according to her interpretation is that the administration is no longer accusing her because she used the N word in the classroom, but because she wanted to have a discussion with the students about the use of that word and reflect with them what was the issue of using that word. That's just a clarification that I think it was important to make before we finish. And thank you, Dominique, Merci beaucoup à tous les collègues et tous les gens qui ont participé. Thank you very much for being here with us. And this will continue. This is a platform, CéC, it's critical education, education critique. And the objective of this platform is to have these kind of conversations. And as we say in the title of the forum today, to overcome self-censorship. That is the worst thing that can happen to a professor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.